Aita forgetting a friend deported after he refused to pay me for taking his exam? This story takes place during the peak of COVID-19, a time when everything moved online. I, 27 at the time, had been working remotely, like most people, and the world felt like it was turned upside down. Social interactions were limited to Zoom calls, and the sense of isolation was real. However, this story isn't about me, well, not entirely. It's about a mutual friend, let's call him D, who reached out to me in absolute desperation. D wasn't originally from the country. He had come here on a student visa to pursue a degree in computer science. We met through a mutual friend a few years prior and kept in touch occasionally. He was a decent guy, always a bit on edge because of the pressure his family back home put on him. Being the first in his family to study abroad, he had a lot riding on his shoulders. His parents had sacrificed a lot to send him here, and the expectation was that he would graduate, get a good job, and eventually support them. However, D wasn't particularly strong in coding. In fact, he was struggling. I knew this because, during our conversations, he often complained about how tough his coursework was. He had already failed his coding exam twice, and his visa was contingent on him maintaining his student status. Failing the exam a third time would mean he couldn't continue his studies, and his visa would be revoked. He'd be sent back to his home country in disgrace. That's where I came in. He knew I was good at coding. I've been working as a software developer for a few years and had a solid grasp of the subject. So, when D reached out to me, he was absolutely desperate. He begged me to take the exam for him. He told me that his entire future depended on it, how he had no options left, and how his family was counting on him. He painted a picture so dire that I actually felt sorry for him. At first, I was hesitant. I knew it was risky, not to mention unethical. But the more he talked, the more I started to think, what's the harm in helping out a friend? Besides, it was COVID times, everything was so chaotic, and it felt like the world was bending its own rules anyway. So, I agreed, but on one condition: he had to pay me $500 for doing it. It was a lot of money for him, but considering the stakes, he agreed without hesitation. I figured if I was going to risk getting involved in academic misconduct, I might as well get compensated for it. The exam was proctored over Zoom, which made things a bit tricky but not impossible. We spent a couple of weeks preparing. I reviewed his coursework, familiarized myself with the types of questions that might be asked, and even set up a remote desktop so I could control his computer during the exam. On the day of the exam, we executed the plan flawlessly. D sat in front of his computer, pretending to take the exam himself while I controlled everything from my own setup. The proctor never suspected a thing, and D passed the exam with flying colors. He was ecstatic. After the exam, we went out for drinks to celebrate. Of course, we each paid our own share. I didn't want him deducting anything from what he owed me. That's when things started to go downhill. D gave me $100 up front as a gesture of good faith and promised to pay the remaining $400 in a couple of weeks, once he had sorted out his graduation stuff. I didn't think much of it at the time. He seemed genuinely relieved and grateful. But as weeks turned into months, I began to realize that he was dodging me. At first, he had excuses: he was waiting for money from his parents, he had unexpected expenses, he needed more time. But eventually, he stopped responding to my messages altogether. It became clear that he wasn't planning on paying me the remaining $400. I was annoyed but not surprised. I've dealt with people flaking on payments before, but this was different. This was someone I had helped in a time of need, someone who had begged me to help save his future, and now he was ghosting me. After about 6 months of this back and forth, I decided I had had enough. I sent him one final message: pay me the $400 you owe me, or I'll report you to the university. I didn't think it would come to that. I was just trying to scare him into paying up. But instead of paying, he blocked me on everything. That was the last straw. I was furious. Here I was, having put my own reputation on the line to help him, and he couldn't even be bothered to pay what he owed me. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about the principle. I had gone out of my way to help him, and he repaid me by ghosting me and blocking me. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. First, I reported him to his university for academic misconduct. I created a fake email address and sent an anonymous tip to the university's academic integrity office. I detailed how I had taken the exam for him and provided evidence to back it up, including screenshots of our conversations and proof of the remote desktop setup. The university took the report seriously. They called D in for a meeting and gave him a chance to retake the exam on the spot. But since he hadn't studied and didn't have me there to help him, he failed, badly. The university decided to retroactively fail him for the course, which meant he couldn't graduate. Since his visa was tied to his student status, this basically screwed him over completely. He was no longer a student, and his visa was effectively nullified. But it didn't end there. D was still living in the country, hoping to somehow fix things. I knew he had no way out, so I took it a step further. I anonymously tipped off the authorities, saying there was an illegal immigrant involved in suspicious activity living in my area. I didn't go into specifics, I just made sure they would come looking for him. They did, and when they found out he was there illegally, they deported him. Now, some mutual friends who found out what happened are saying I went too far. They think it was a petty move to ruin his entire life over $400. On one hand, I can see where they're coming from. It was a harsh consequence for what could be seen as a minor slight. But on the other hand, I feel like he deserved it for trying to scam me. I wouldn't have minded if he had come clean, saying he didn't have the money or the financial capacity to pay and was genuinely sorry. I might have let the matter go without a hitch. But he didn't. He chose to block me, thinking I would just forget about it. So, Reddit, Aita? Edit. For some additional context, I want to clarify a few things. 1. The report to the university was done through an anonymous tip-off with a fake email, along with all the proof. They called him in and gave him a chance to retake the exam on the spot, but he never studied and failed at the most basic stuff. 2. As for the deportation, I felt a bit scared that he might try to hurt me in some way, so I made sure he never set foot in the country again. Edit 2. To those saying I could have let it go, maybe I could have. But honestly, it felt like a slap in the face after I went out of my way to help him. It's not just about the money, it's about the principle. I wasn't going to be the one who got screwed over. Update. Hey everyone, I wasn't planning on posting an update, but a lot has happened since my original post, and I feel like I owe it to those who commented and gave their input. I've been thinking a lot about everything that went down, and some recent events have really changed my perspective. After I reported D to the university and tipped off the authorities, I thought I was done with it. I was still angry, but I figured I'd made my point and could move on. I honestly believed that D had gotten what he deserved for ghosting me after I helped him. But as it turns out, things were more complicated than I realized. About 2 weeks after D was deported, I got a message from one of our mutual friends. Let's call her S. She was the only person who knew the full story about what had happened, and she reached out to tell me something that left me reeling. Apparently, D had been in a really bad place mentally for a while. His family had been putting intense pressure on him to succeed, and the stress of failing his exams twice had pushed him to the brink. He never told me how deep his struggles went, but according to S, he had been dealing with severe depression and anxiety. The reason he didn't pay me the remaining $400 wasn't because he didn't want to, he literally couldn't. His financial situation was way worse than he had let on, and he was too ashamed to admit it. When I reported him to the university and got him deported, it was the final blow. He lost everything, his education, his future, and his family's trust. The worst part? A few days after he was sent back to his home country, he took his own life. His family found him in his room, surrounded by his textbooks, with a note that simply said, "I'm sorry. I've been trying to process this ever since I found out. I'm not going to lie, I feel absolutely horrible. I thought I was just getting back at him for what he did to me, but I had no idea what he was going through. I never meant for things to go this far. It's one thing to be angry over money, but I never wanted to push someone to the point where they felt like they had no other option. I know a lot of you might think that this is my fault, and honestly, I don't know what to think anymore. Part of me feels like I was justified in being angry, but another part of me can't stop thinking that I could have handled things differently. Maybe if I had just reached out to him one more time, tried to talk to him instead of going nuclear, things wouldn't have ended this way. I haven't been able to sleep properly since I found out. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face, and I keep thinking about that note. I keep thinking about how he must have felt in those final moments, and it's tearing me apart. S told me that his family is devastated. They've lost their son, and they don't even know the full story of what happened. I don't know if I should tell them or if that would just make things worse. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for what I did. I thought I was just getting revenge, but now I feel like I've ruined more than just his life, I've ruined mine too. I don't know what else to say, except that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how things turned out, and I'm sorry for not being more understanding. I don't expect anyone to forgive me, but I just needed to get this off my chest. Thanks for reading, and please, if you're going through something similar, reach out to someone. Don't do what I did. Don't let your anger drive you to make decisions you'll regret for the rest of your life.